You're listening to Feathers, a podcast of stories of women walking in faith. I hope these stories inspire you and encourage you to take flight in your own faith. I'm your host, Amy Bennett, and this is Season 6, Episode 9. Feathers is an outreach of Abiding Ministries. Find more encouragement at abidingministries.net. Well, hey friend, I am so glad you're here. I know this said this is the 9th episode of Season 6, but can you believe that if we were just counting straight, this is episode 90? It is so hard to believe we've been together for 90 episodes. It's been a lot of work, but man, what a privilege to talk to all these women and see how God is moving and working in the lives of people all around the world. So once again, thank you for joining me here. Today, I'm excited to have a longtime blogging friend and author, Marla Taviano. Marla and her family currently reside in Cambodia, and technology, as it does, totally astounded me, and we were able to have a wonderful conversation while she is still there. I've watched over the last many years as their family began dreaming about moving there, and man, they have had so many struggles on the way. But I love Marla. I love how she truly walks out her faith and has been such an inspiration to me over the years. And I wanted to introduce you to her and just hear the story and how God has worked in their lives. So this episode is on the long side for those of you that enjoy the long form podcast. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Here is my conversation with Marla. Well, hey, Marla, and welcome to Feathers today.
Thanks, Amy. I'm so glad to be here.
Oh, I'm so happy to finally have you on my podcast. I've wanted you on the podcast for a long time. But before we get into how we connected, I want you to introduce yourself and your family to the people listening.
Okay. My name is Marla Taviano. I am married to Gabe, and our 20th anniversary is coming up in January of 2018. We have 3 daughters. Olivia is 16, Ava is 14, and Nina is 11. And we lived in Ohio for most of our 20 years of marriage, except the last 2 years we have lived in Cambodia.
And oh my goodness, how many questions I could follow up that statement with. So yes, Marla is sitting in Cambodia as she is speaking, and I'm down here in South Carolina, over here in South Carolina, you should say. And it's, we were joking, I was telling my family that we were talking, and I was like, yeah, I'll have to ask her how Saturday's going to be.
So far, so good.
Yeah. So it's Saturday, 8 a.m. there, and Friday night, 9 p.m. here.
Yes.
Which is so kind of crazy.
Yeah.
But
time zone.
Yeah. So I was actually going back in my blog to figure out kind of what was the time frame that we got connected, and from what I can tell, so we're online kind of blog friends back from 2010 when you did the Radical read along with David Platt.
Oh, okay.
That was the first kind of mention of you on my blog, so somewhere around. That's kind of what I remember. And then I actually thought it was, and then 2 years later, you did Jen Hatmaker's from the book 7. Wasn't it called The Summer of 7? Did you do that?
I don't remember calling it the Summer of 7, but yes, I did a book study on 7.
Okay,
so.
You know what? I think we had gotten connected to another blog friend that I have gotten connected to, and then she did a challenge one summer of 7. I think she called it Summer of 7. But I distinctly remember you doing something around 7.
Yes, we did. Jen worked with me to help me with that. It was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Radicals started in 2010, and since then, I have been following your family as you guys have made this journey over to Cambodia, and oh my goodness, there's a million stories in between those years.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So, I mean, I just have loved to see how you guys have just followed God. I mean, it has not been an easy path at all. But you guys are finally there. I'm sure it's not the end of your story at all. But I know this is something that you guys have been wanting to do for a long time. And wanted you guys to share all the good stuff that's happened, and particularly in some of the work you've done with refugees I actually had Jill Anderson on the podcast a couple weeks ago, and her family is in Michigan and sponsored a family from the DR Congo. And so I just thought it was interesting. I've been trying to have you on my podcast for at least a year, and then it just happened to work out that we could do it now, and I just had Jill on. So I think it's going to be great to talk about your work there. So anyway, I'm rambling on, but would love for you to share the journey that you guys have been on, starting with where all this started with you guys wanting to get to Cambodia.
Yeah, definitely. And I will, I'll try really hard to make that part short so we can focus on what I've recently been writing about, which is our time in the refugee community. But it started back in 2009, and our church at the time was sponsoring an orphan home in Cambodia. And to be honest, I did not really know a thing about Cambodia. I knew that it was in Asia because they said it was, but I had not really heard of it. So during that time, that was around the time that, and actually you and I met in person one time. I think that was before 2010.
Yeah, I know we met, but what year was that then?
I don't know. It's all blurring together.
Yeah.
But around that time, 2008, 2009, 2010, God was just really moving in my heart in a lot of ways, and he used a lot of people on the internet to do it. And I think the internet, I love the internet, and I think that it is what he used to start to make my world bigger, because I had grown up in a very conservative Christian home, gone to a public school, but half my teachers were Christians in a very small town, went to a Christian university, and everyone just had the same kind of mindset that I did pretty much. And so then once I got out on the internet and started reading about these people who also said they were Christians but had different ideas about loving the poor and things like that were just not on my radar, that started to pique my interest. And then when our church sponsored this orphan home in Cambodia, I thought, you know what, I really want to go. I want to go see this. And so I said something to Gabe, my husband, and he said to me, Marla, the video shows all these people from America pushing these Cambodian kids on swings. Why would we pay $2,500 to go do that? And I thought, oh, you're ruining my dream. But I decided to keep my mouth shut and just pray that he would change his mind. Now, I do this a lot, and very often God does change his mind, but very often God also changes my mind, which is not the plan, but that's how it works out. But in this case, Gabe came to me a few weeks later and said, do you still want to go to Cambodia? Let's apply for the trip. I thought, wow. Okay, so that was July 2010. We went with a group of 7 people, and there was some pushing kids on swings, but we also got to meet some organizations that were fighting human trafficking there, which was something else that I had never heard of, that kids were being sold as young as 4 and 5 years old, and there were people on the ground over in Cambodia trying to put a stop to this evil. And that really sparked Gabe's interest. He said, you know what, these kids in this orphan home, there are 20 kids with 2 Cambodian parents. They're well taken care of. I don't think we need to go back and visit them all the time. But with all these hurting kids who are in danger, I can see us doing something to help them. So when we got back, it was just a 10-day trip. When we got back in July 2010, our girls made us promise. So they were very young at the time, 9, 7, and 4 maybe. Made us promise that we would not go back to Cambodia without them. So we started saving money for a trip. So the girls would sell things. They would help me babysit. I was doing a lot of speaking and writing at the time, so all of that money went into this Cambodia fund. And then people would overpay for things, like the girls would make these necklaces and sell them for $2, and someone would give them $20. So the money started to add up, and pretty soon we were getting close to having enough to go. And then in October of 2011, so we had already had plane tickets by this point. We were going to leave in December of 2011 for 5 weeks in Cambodia. Gabe was 34 at the time, and he suffered from a massive heart attack and almost died. So that kind of put everything to a screeching halt, except that when he got released from the hospital 3 days later, his doctor gave him the go-ahead to still go to Cambodia. Even though there's no Western health care where we would be, if he had another heart attack, he would die. But he decided that we would go in faith. So we did that. At the time, our middle daughter was homeschooled, and our other two were in 5th grade and kindergarten, and their teachers graciously allowed them to miss 3 weeks of school. The other 2 weeks were over Christmas break. And we spent 5 weeks as a family in Cambodia. So we went to go visit those kids that we had met before. Our girls have been writing them letters back and forth for a couple years. We made about 10 visits to them over the 5 weeks. And then there was a boys' center that we got involved with that was for boys who had been trafficked or were at risk of being trafficked. The first center of that kind in Cambodia, because typically girls were helped, and the Cambodian government didn't want to believe that boys were also being sold. So we spent time there, met some other people, and I had been wanting secretly and not so secretly to move to Cambodia. Gabe did not feel that same call. And as time went on in Cambodia during those 5 weeks, it got harder and harder. The longer you're there, the more you realize, oh, this is not a fun little vacation to Cambodia. This is real life. And so I had kind of made peace with that toward the end of our trip and thought, you know what, I don't want to move to Cambodia either. I remember all the comforts of America and I'm ready to go back. But we had about a week left, and Gabe woke up one morning, as in January 2012, and he said to me, God just showed me what I could do if we moved to Cambodia, which totally floored me. He laid out this vision, and I had never gotten a vision from God. These were just my feelings. A vision to train up young people in Cambodia to do web design, photography, the things that he does for a living, and carve a path out of poverty for them, disciple them, share Jesus with them. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. So we went back to America with a plan that we were going to sell our house, pay off some debt, and we would move to Cambodia as soon as possible. And the girls were totally on board. So we get back in January 2012, and a couple weeks later, we ended up in the ER because Gabe was having chest pains and thought it was another heart attack. And that led to almost 3 years of severe anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts, couldn't leave the house, couldn't leave the bedroom, lost his job, we lost our house. It was a crazy, crazy, crazy time. And I write all about that in an ebook called The Storm, which if I think too long about that ebook, I can't believe that I put all of that out there for the world to read, because it's not a pretty picture. I tell people that the good Christian girl that I am, I never cussed much at all in my whole life. In those 3 years, I filled up a lifetime, about 40 years of cussing. And so it was just a rough time, because from my vantage point, God had given us a call, he had given us a dream, and then he crushed it. More specifically, my husband crushed it by having this stupid anxiety that he couldn't even leave the bedroom, let alone get on a plane and move to Cambodia. So God did some amazing healing work in that time. And that brings us to the end of 2013, where through another series of amazing God events, we decided to move from our house into a low-income apartment complex called Abbey Lane. It was just a mile down the road. It had been there the whole time that we had lived in our house for 8 years, and we never knew it was there.
So let me interrupt and ask a question. So that's a big jump from going to your house to moving to Abbey Lane.
Yes.
Why? What led you to go to Abbey Lane?
Yes. We had talked about the fact we made a really dumb decision when we moved into our house. We were trying to sell another house. We thought we'd have a big down payment. It turned out that we didn't. So we were pretty much paying almost all interest every month for those 8 years. So at the end of this time, we were going to owe more money than we could get out of the house. So when we talked about moving to Cambodia, we said, what if we sold our house, took the loss, moved into a cheap apartment somewhere, and we could pay off what we owed on the house while we wait for God to give us the green light for Cambodia. So that was a thought that we had. In September of 2013, our church, which is called Sanctuary Columbus Church in Columbus, Ohio, we had helped plant that church close to the inner city, and our pastor is African American, and his dream was to have a multi-ethnic church in the city of Columbus. A multi-ethnic church is one of the hardest things you could ever start because Sunday morning, they say, is one of the most racially segregated times of the whole week. The white people go to the white church, the black people go to the black church, the Koreans go to the Korean church, and we just want to separate into people who are like us and do church the way we want to do church. And so we were really committed to helping him with this multi-ethnic church. And down the road from the church was an apartment complex that was primarily Somali refugees. And a friend of ours at the church had gotten connected through World Relief to this apartment complex. And we kind of, as a church, dreamed of starting a tutoring program in this apartment complex. And it turned out that we partnered with World Relief, and our pastor used one of the bedrooms in this apartment as his office, so it was a win-win for everybody. And then we opened up the bigger area of the apartment and the other room for tutoring. So our family got involved there doing this tutoring, met some families who lived at Abbey Lane, and right then it all kind of fell together, and I thought, this is it. This is the apartment that we're supposed to move to, because it's not just a random apartment where we can pay off what we owe on our house. It's an apartment where we can have real relationships with people. It's kind of like a mission field where we can hang out and wait until we can go to Cambodia.
Gotcha. Okay, so you show up in Abbey Lane.
Yes, and wow, it was the first time we went. I mean, I felt like I had been transported to another country. It was such a surreal experience. I had no idea how I had just left my house, driven a mile, pulled into this apartment complex, and everyone there is dressed in long, colorful clothes, hijabs on their heads. Everyone's skin is so much darker than mine. All these kids are running around and playing, and my mouth must have been wide open, thinking, how is this here? I had no idea this was here. And I would find out very quickly that Columbus, Ohio has the second largest population of Somali refugees after Minneapolis, Minnesota. And they typically find housing for them in these areas where they can all live together in community. We had done all of our shopping up north in the, quote, nice area of town, but you head south a mile and there are all these low-income apartment complexes with refugees from Somalia. Not just Somalia, Nepal, Eritrea, quite a few illegal immigrants, probably from Mexico, who all became our friends. And it really changed our lives in a way that we never could have imagined. And that's what I write about in my new ebook called Shipwrecked. And it's a direct continuation from the storm, because of the storm that hit our lives with Gabe's heart attack and all of that. And then it's like we got shipwrecked, but on this island that we never knew existed.
Yeah, and I love that you begin the book talking about that it was what you called your Malta, that somebody had given you kind of a vision. That's what this was. So for those of us not familiar with that reference from Scripture, talk about what that is from Scripture, and then how that relates, because I think it's a great kind of vision for your time there.
Oh, absolutely. And the friend who gave me this word that she said that God had for me will forever be in my heart. As I really felt like she saved my life. Because what happened is like I said, we moved to Abbey Lane thinking this will be just a holding place where we'll be until we get our act together, till Gabe gets healed, till we get enough money to move to Cambodia. And I just figured we will be neighbors, we will love people because that's what we love to do. Isn't that great of us? And we will come in and help them. And as it turned out, these these people who have been in America from anywhere from one day, we met some people the day they got to America, up to 14 years. Some of these people have lived here a long time. These people instantly welcomed us into their apartments. They fed us their food. They served us tea. They wanted to know all about us. They gave us gifts. They cared for us. It blew our minds and just did something to our hearts that I don't know that I could ever adequately explain it. And so as time went on and Gabe is getting better and we're discussing plans for Cambodia and then making some plans for Cambodia toward the end of 2014, my heart felt like it was being ripped in two. And I thought, wait a second, what are we doing? Maybe God changed the plan. Maybe Abbey Lane is the new plan. We know what's happening here. We are loved here. We're needed here. This is beautiful. Hard, yes, but also so beautiful. And we're just going to leave this and go to a complete unknown in Cambodia just because Gabe thought that God might have said, you can do this in Cambodia. And I wrestled more than I've ever wrestled with anything. And it was painful. And there were a lot of tears. And I thought, I don't think I can do this. After 3 years of crying and begging God to go to Cambodia, I do not want to go. I've got to stay here. We're going to abandon these friends. And I can't do it. And we went to a prayer night at a friend's house. And my friend Elaine was there. And she said, Marla, God gave me a word for you. And she pointed out Acts 28. Where Paul he's a prisoner and he's being transported by ship with a couple hundred other prisoners. A storm comes up. A lot of things happen. It's a great 2 chapters in the Bible, Acts 27 and 28. And Paul kind of warns them, there's going to be a storm if we try to head out. They say, yeah, we can handle it. Well, they can't. And the plan is they're going to kill all the prisoners so they don't escape. Paul convinces them not to, and they all end up on this island with their broken ship, and the island is called Malta. And the Bible doesn't say a lot about it, but it's about 10 verses where we learn that the islanders welcomed these people graciously. They fed them, they gave them a place to stay, they were friends for them. For 3 whole months they did this, and in return, Paul healed the village chief's father and did some other things to bless them back. So it was very much a mutual relationship. But at the end of the time, when the season came and the boat was repaired, Paul didn't stay there. He moved on to his original destination. And that's what my friend Elaine said to me. She said, Marla, I really believe Abbey Lane is your Malta. You were shipwrecked here. You didn't mean to be here. It turned out to be wonderful, but now the boat is fixed and you got to get back in it and you got to go back to the original destination that God called you to. And I'm not one always to just take a word that someone says is from God to me, but this one resonated with me in a way that nothing ever has, and just gave me so much comfort and so much peace. And I thought, you know what, we can do this. We can do it. Now, I will say that the 2 years being in Cambodia, how many times have I asked myself, should we have stayed at Abbey Lane? Maybe 300. But I do also get confirmation every single day that this is where we're supposed to be.
Well, I just love that. I love, too, that you're praying so hard about that and that God answered that with, a person, but also through Scripture. I love when he does that. It's like, he does that often with me, is
yes.
Using Scripture. It's like not really what it was meant for it originally, but somehow applying that. I don't know. I find that really cool, and I think that's just the perfect picture for you guys. It just, because I read that, I think, for the first time in your book. I don't know that you've blogged about that in the past or not, but maybe you did, but I just thought it was perfect. And I could definitely see how that could be your Malta. So let's talk about, so you guys clearly are in Cambodia. We talked about that at the very beginning, but I want to concentrate on your time at Abbey Lane. And I don't even know if I said this since we were recording or not, but since I did. So I had interviewed Joe Anderson in her
Yes.
time sponsoring refugees as well. But you guys lived and had your daily life all the time with these families. So I'm just curious, you move into this, it's kind of a temporary holding place for you guys, but you see it kind of as a mission field. You've done some tutoring work. What did this look like on a daily basis? Like, how did that end up playing out?
Well, it was completely normal and also very not normal. And I think one of the things that kept us grounded and humble in this was we were not rich white people who were moving into an apartment complex to be white saviors and help people. We were poor people who had lost our house and couldn't stay in it and had no money, and people from our church were bringing us groceries, and my husband was struggling with depression and anxiety and suicidal thoughts and all of this. We were broken. We were financially poor and emotionally wrung out, and we were just a mess. We had hit rock bottom. So we are coming into this place and being able to relate to our neighbors, not in specific circumstances, but definitely so much more than we ever would have been able to just a few years earlier. So as far as, I call it a low-income apartment complex. I don't know what the term really would be. I don't know. This was not, it wasn't disgusting. It wasn't super scary. A lot of people are scared. They're intimidated by going here. We heard a lot from people that we don't think you should do this. This is not a good idea. Are your children going to be safe? But it really felt like home to us. Now looking back at photos of Abbey Lane, I just get this warm, bubbly feeling. I don't get any feeling of, oh, that's an ugly place to live. I get, that's the most beautiful place on earth. But when we got there, and I talk about this in the book, but we got special treatment. We did not realize it at first until we started getting to know our neighbors and would hear about their interactions with the management of the apartment complex. But when we moved in, they were gracious to us. They gutted our whole apartment, got rid of all of the old carpet. They did new paint. We got a whole new bathroom, new bathtub, new toilet, new sink. The kitchen was still pretty, I would call it trashed, but the rest of everything was beautiful. So we were moving into a place that actually looked very nice, and we had sold about 3/4 of what we owned. This apartment was 797 square feet, so very small area, and we filled it with our furniture that we had left and a lot of maps and globes, which were kind of my thing, and
Books, of course.
Yeah, books and photos and bright lamps. And anytime anyone walked in, their face registered surprise, especially our neighbors, because the inside of our apartment was such a contrast from so many of theirs. And even other people who had been very hesitant when we told them we were going to move there walked in and would say things like, "Oh, wow, this is really nice. Oh, I could live here. Oh," like they just were very shocked. So we were not, well, I'll tell you, later some things came into play, like bedbugs and our van getting stolen and some things that weren't so great. But we loved it. We lived on the 3rd floor. The 1st floor is halfway buried under the ground, very dark and depressing. Then the 2nd floor is not the best place to live either, because you're right in between everybody's noise and traffic. The 3rd place was the best, I think. No one above you making noise. And we got to live, another God thing, right beside a couple named Josh and Laura, who we'd met in September before we moved in December. They were fellow believers who had moved in 2 years before for this specific purpose of loving neighbors and sharing the gospel. They were so much younger than us, but were so much, I would say, more mature than us. They were just two of the most amazing people you've ever met. And I talk a lot about them in the book because their son Judah was diagnosed with cancer at the age of 3 months, right when we first met them. So we got to walk through a lot of things with them. But on this third floor, we've got Josh and Laura beside us. Our neighbor to the right was from Nepal. And then you walk along this balcony past maybe 10 apartments, and that's where the tutoring apartment was. So we were really close to the tutoring apartment. All we had to do on Tuesday night tutoring was just walk down to the apartment. And then we'd have other kids that started coming to our apartment for tutoring throughout the week because they knew that we lived there. So it was just a real community. I felt like we lived in a college dorm, except we weren't in college, and none of our neighbors were from America, or not very many of them were. But that's the kind of feel you got. It was like a U-shaped apartment complex, kind of three sides of a square, and there were four of these. And the inside is a courtyard with grass, so I could come out on my balcony. I could see everybody else's apartment facing mine or on the side, and I could see all the kids and my kids playing out on the grass below me. So it was a very unique experience, and one that I've tried to get other people to get on board with. So far, I've had no luck, but there is one girl at our church back in Ohio who's considering moving to Abbey Lane. So hopefully that works out.
So I have to ask this, and maybe I'm asking it in ignorance, so forgive me if I am.
No, never ignorance. Don't worry about that.
Well, no, it's just that, I don't know, just reading your book, there seemed to be like, I mean, I know you look back and say, you know, I love it and it's so wonderful, but I just listen to some of the stories where there's people constantly coming in, you know, they're asking for, this sounds terrible that I'm saying this, but they're asking for water. There's been time when they're calling your kids' names. You know, it like wasn't always easy, right?
Absolutely not. And I journaled, and I do journal every single thing that happens in my life, every emotion that I have, every feeling I have. On that note, I was just talking to my 11-year-old daughter 2 days ago. We drove the moto. I drive a moto now, which I learned to do at age 40, which is the most hilarious thing that I can ever.
I didn't realize you had started.
Yeah, so Nina and I are on the moto on the way to get some groceries the other day, and we were talking somehow about me being pregnant with her. I don't remember what. But I told her that originally I wanted 4 kids, Gabe wanted 2, and we settled on 3. And during my pregnancy with Nina, I wrote down every single hard thing that happened. Every time my stomach hurt, every time my back hurt, every time I was craving something, I couldn't have it, every time food tasted gross, all of this. And there was a ton. This was not a good pregnancy. Because I knew that as soon as it was over, I would look back and be like, oh my goodness, pregnancy was the most beautiful, romantic time of my life. The baby growing in my belly, feeling her kick. Oh, and I would romanticize it, and I would look back and think, I have got to have another baby. That was just the most beautiful time, when it wasn't. So with Abbey Lane, I do have to catch myself, and that's part of the reason I wrote the book, is so that I could look back and say, oh yeah, it wasn't all peaches and cream. It was hard, and I tried in the book to do an honest mix of that, how it really, really was, the good, the bad, and the really, really ugly, the things that were hard about it, the things that were beautiful about it. And it's kind of funny, here in Cambodia, we live in a pretty nice house that costs the same as our apartment in Abbey Lane, but it's about 3 times bigger and has a big yard, and we have a wall and a gate around us. So our interaction with our neighbors is when we're ready to go interact, or when we go out into a different place to interact. And so no one is beating down my door. No one's coming in my apartment. And it seems funny to me because it seems kind of switched. Like in America, you should have your privacy and people leave you alone. And then you go to be a missionary in a foreign country and you should have all the people.
Yeah, I didn't think about that.
And Ours was flopped, but I do believe that God has kind of given us this time as we're still figuring out what our final destination in Cambodia will be. I think he's given us this time to rest, to not have, yes, absolutely, and to not have the demands of people always knocking down our door. So we'll see how that happens. But yes, you're so right. There was a lot of hard, and I have a whole chapter in the book that is only 1 and 2 sentence lines from my journal where I say things like, I am done helping people. I do not want to help anyone.
Well,
I don't want anybody to come to my door.
It was so funny because it's like, I've only heard you say like really good things about it. It's like, oh my gosh, I love Abby Lane. I don't want to leave it, blah, blah, blah. And then I'm reading the book and I'm like, this is terrible. Like, like they just called, your daughter the B word, and like they're slapping each other and they're throwing things, and people are like dropping kids off and coming back late to get them. And I mean, it's kind of like, you talk about with the pregnancy, it's kind of like reading like What You Can Expect book, and you go, oh, I don't ever want to be pregnant.
Yeah.
But I mean, so I guess my question is like, well, one, can you talk about some of the hard things so the people listening might understand what the hard was like, but then talk about why it was good.
Yeah, I think I've always struggled with this balance online with sharing the negative, the positive, making sure that I'm not putting other people in a bad light. So I think if people are under the impression that Abbey Lane is a beautiful, wonderful place, that has been more of my attempt to say, you know what, refugees from Somalia are not terrorists to be feared. They are real people. They are kind people. They have very little money, yet they are making us this elaborate meal that took them 10 hours to make. Pointing all of that out because I feel like a lot of people reading already have a negative view of refugees. So that part was intentional. And not wanting to shame anybody. So I do change a lot of names in the Shipwrecked book, and I put an asterisk by that when I say that the name has been changed. And there's actually one story that was interesting, a whole story about a woman and her daughter. And this woman and I are still friends. I'm friends with so many of them on Facebook, which is really, really great to be able to keep in touch with them like that. But she had asked me for a copy of the ebook, and I thought to myself, oh, no. I know I changed her name, but she's going to know that it's her, and now she's going to know what I thought about this story. And I sent it to her anyway. I explained to her that she was in there, but her name was changed. And she wrote back, and this woman is not Somali. She's American. She wrote me back and said that she loved every bit of the book, that she could tell the names that I changed. She figured those people out, that she laughed and cried, and that she just loved this book. And I thought, okay, wow, that's like breathe a deep sigh of relief that I have not offended her. So back to your question of the good, the bad. The book is very honest. It's very much both of those things. And I think that's kind of how life is. I've found that the easiest times are also more boring, not as deep, not as impactful. We've gone through a couple things very recently here that I won't go into, but have been very painful. And I feel like God is really, really using the deep pain to make something beautiful out of it. So I think for me, when I look at Abbey Lane as a whole and I see those hard times and those negative things, they don't take away from the beauty, they add to it, because we made it through those times. Each one of those situations where the girls got called a name or there was a fight or something like that, we worked through it, we resolved it, and came out on the other side better. In the cases where we didn't, I just chalked that up to everything doesn't get tied up with a neat bow every time as you go through your life. And the things that we've learned and the growth in our character, I do tell God pretty often, okay, you know what, God, I think I am all the way grown now. Like, I think you could stop anytime with all of this character building, because I'm pretty confident that my character is A-okay now, which is probably a warning sign that no, it's not, if I am at that level of pride and not humility. The people have asked us about our girls a lot, like, oh, your girls seem to care about other people, or they don't seem like typical teenage girls. How could I make my kids be like that? And if, depending on how I'm feeling at the moment when they ask that question, I may say something like, well, you could take them on a trip to Cambodia. They could sell everything they own to save up for this trip. Their dad could have a heart attack and almost die. He could have severe anxiety and depression and want to kill himself. They could lose their house. They could lose some of their friends. They could, and I go on and on and on. And now
Right.
they care about people. Oh, well, we don't want to go through all that.
Yeah,
well,
it's the suffering.
Yeah.
The suffering. It's funny, we were just studying that in our small group last night. We were talking about that, Romans. The suffering produces the perseverance and character and hope and all of that. So yeah. I do, because I'm one of those. I look at your girls and I'm like, wow. Like, I do love their hearts. I think they do have a special dose of compassion, though.
They do. They are not perfect.
Yes.
And
I think you're clear about that too.
Yeah. Yeah, good.
Yeah, for sure.
What else can I tell you about Abby Lane or anything else?
Well, I'm also interested to the fact that when I talked to Jill, and I'm just relating back to Jill because that's the only one I've had on the podcast that's worked with the refugees, but her refugee family was a Christian family. And so immediately they had, this bond of being believers and kind of on the same kind of ground, right?
Yes.
This common ground. But much of who you worked with, they were Muslim, correct?
Yes.
So I'm just curious how that impacted your relationship with them. Was it ever a source of tension? Was it something? I think you told one story where they was one of the little girls, not little girls, but teenagers, like trying to convert you.
Yes.
Yeah. Tell me how that played into your time with them.
Yeah, in the apartment complex where we lived, I don't have exact numbers. I usually say 75 to 80% were Somali refugees, which means 100% of them were Muslim. I personally do not know a Somali Christian. I know there are some, but in that country, almost everyone is Muslim. And then Eritreans, I did not know where this country was a few years ago. It's used to be part of Ethiopia, so it's in the same general vicinity as Somalia. Our Eritrean neighbors were Christian. Now, I don't know. We did have some discussions. I don't know their belief systems, how much that would line up with what we believe, but they identified as Christians, not as Muslims. And then our neighbors from Nepal were Hindu, and we did not have very much interaction with Nepali adults. None of the ones that lived close to us could speak any English at all. The girls did have a few Nepali friends who were teenagers and younger, and one girl in particular had asked us if she could come to church with us. She never did. But she asked if she could come to church sometime, and I said, well, absolutely, but you would need to ask your mom because it's a Christian church. And she said, oh, my mom will let me go to church just as long as I still stay Hindu. I said, okay. So that would be a difference then. Like, our Eritrean friends would be allowed to come to our church. Our Hindu friends may be allowed to come as long as they stay Hindu. And then our Somali friends would not come to our church. So how did that play out? There are so many differing philosophies on how to share your faith with someone who is Muslim. And we don't think that we have it perfect or have it down pat. But what we knew was that our relationships with them were very, very, very important to us, and that we did not want them to think that we were looking at them as a project, that we were trying to convert them, and then that's all the use that we had for them. We wanted them to know that our love and friendship was unconditional, that we would be their friends no matter what, that we would be honest about our faith, but we also wanted them to be honest about theirs. And we wanted them to ask us questions, and we wanted to ask questions because of all the misconceptions between Muslims and Christians about what we each believe. So our biggest conversations were with teenage girls who were 16, 17, 18. You mentioned the one girl who came to our house and pulled up a YouTube video of two Muslim men praying and was having our daughter watch it. And it took me a while, and then I realized this is like her trying to...
like the Jesus film.
Yeah. Yes, like the Jesus film. That's what I called it. It was like her Jesus film. Whether or not she thought she needed to do this because like out of obligation and duty as part of her religion, or maybe she just liked us and thought we could be even better if we were Muslim. I don't know what was going on in her head, but she definitely tried to share that. And then we took two other girls to lunch one day and then came back and just told them, we want to learn from you about Islam, and we want to share with you also. So we shared maybe an hour and a half with them, and just a really, really great time of learning about each other. And the one thing that stood out to me from that was when I mentioned that I had fasted before, and they were shocked because they'd never heard of a Christian who fasted. And as Christians, we would think, well, of course Christians fast. It's in the Bible, or at least we're supposed to, or sometimes we do, or maybe we don't. But for Muslims, it's a thing that they take very seriously. And for 1 month out of every year during Ramadan, they fast the whole month. They can eat after the sun goes down, but during the day they don't drink any water, eat any food. So they're kind of looking at Islam as being devout and being full of faith and doing what God wants them to do. And they look at Christians as living however the heck they want. Now, there's truth in that, sadly, but what they didn't know is there are also Christians who take their faith very, very seriously. So just that general, let's learn from each other, let's respect each other, let's ask questions, even if we're afraid, like you said, afraid of seeming ignorant. It's okay, just ask the questions. And just like, let's say you sat down and talked to two Christians and now you think you know everything about Christianity. Well, who were these two Christians and what do they really believe? You could sit down with two more Christians every day for a year and your idea of Christianity is going to be wildly different. So knowing that just sitting down with two teenage Muslim girls doesn't mean that I'm now an expert on Islam. So we did a lot of studying on our own. We went to a seminar and then went through a course called it's called Bridges, where they work to build bridges between Muslims and Christians, show the similarities in our faith so that we can then show what's different and ask more questions and hopefully lead them to Christ. But we knew that we were not going to leave Abbey Lane with any friends being converted from Islam to Christianity. I still hold out hope for that, obviously. I still pray for these friends. But like I said, it's very important to me that they knew that we love them unconditionally and that we were not there to convert them and move on. So we've had just some really great conversations, even lately over the internet. And then this was a complete God miracle that one of those teenage girls just came to visit us in Cambodia last week. She had not seen her dad for 9 years. She and her sister and her two brothers and their mom. And I write this story in the book, but I don't tell the good news because it hadn't happened yet when I finished the book. But they left their dad in Saudi Arabia 9 years ago, and he has not been able to get to America because he is a Muslim man who lives in Saudi Arabia. And the red tape and all of that. And now with the new orders that are going on, he was so close to being able to get to reunite with his family, and now they don't know. So he recently moved to Malaysia because he heard that it would be easier for him to get to America from there than from Saudi Arabia. He's not from Saudi Arabia, he's Somali. Anyway, our friend Sabah, she is 20, and she graduated from high school a couple years ago and has been working a job, and her family has been saving money, and it was decided that she would be able to go and visit her dad. She'd be the first person in their family to see him in 9 years. So she saved up the money and she made the trip. She's staying with him for over a month, and she messaged me a few weeks ago and said, I saw how close Cambodia is to Malaysia. Do you think there's any way that I could come see you? And we found her a ticket for just $65 round trip.
Oh my goodness.
She flew from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia to Siem Reap, Cambodia. The airport's about a 5-minute moto drive from our house. And we picked her up, and she was here for 2 days, and she made sambusa for us and sha, which is the Somali tea, the things that I rave about in my book.
I was going to ask about those.
Yeah, and she brought some things with her to help her make them, and she brought us gifts from Malaysia, and it was surreal. I could not believe, I still can't believe. Like, Gabe's mom has visited us in Cambodia, but no one else from our family has even been able to visit us. And I could not believe that one of our Muslim friends from Abbey Lane was in my house in Cambodia making me sambusa. And it was right around the time that my ebook came out. So it was just like God saying, see, I see you. I love you. This is all going to be just fine. So even while Sabah was here, it was just a really, really neat experience. There would be times when she would say, I need to go pray. So she would go into one of the bedrooms. She would first wash her face and her hands and do all of that. She'd take her prayer rug and her prayer shawl. She would go pray. And then when she was done, she would come out. We talked so much about the differences between Christianity, Islam, and now Buddhism, because here in Cambodia, 98% of people identify as Buddhists. So that was another piece that we could add to our conversation. We talked a lot about fear of spirits and how Cambodians believe so much in spirits, but so do Christians and so do Muslims. And we talked about how in Cambodia, it's easier to understand why people are scared of spirits because of the oppression here that we can actually physically feel. I mean, so in America, I think it's easy for us to dismiss that and say, well, I believe in the Holy Spirit and I believe in the devil, but I don't really believe that there's any spiritual warfare or anything real going on like that. Well, I won't argue with them, but for me, my experience doesn't lie. Like I've felt it, I've seen it, I've heard it. Even our girls have seen visions of things here. So that was just a really great conversation. So we had a young Cambodian guy here with us too, and so we were all sitting around this table. He's telling his experience from growing up Buddhist. He's now a Christian. I'm sharing, and Sabah is sharing, and I thought, this is what I was made for, to sit at this table and talk with these young people and share my faith, and yeah, it was pretty cool.
That's just, I don't know. I'm just thinking about that. I mean, that never happens. I mean, that I've seen, that people can sit down from three, different backgrounds, religious backgrounds, and they just have a polite conversation about it. But I think it's a really great picture of what reconciliation and what, I don't know if reconciliation is the right word, but just relationship really can be like.
Yes, and that's my biggest thing that I would love Christians to know. I think some people have told me they wouldn't feel right sitting with a Muslim and not telling them, if you don't convert to Christianity, you're going to hell. And I feel like what you're saying with the reconciliation and the showing them that they are still God's child and they are still worth something before they're converted. I recently read a book called Forgive Us, and this book talks about all the groups of people that Christians have harmed over the years. Black people, Native Americans, Muslims, Jews, and they say that we've often looked at Native Americans, at Muslims, as not having human worth until they've converted to Christianity. We call them things like pagans or heathens or barbarians or whatever. And that's just, it's a mindset that has to switch. But just the loving, I don't see how anyone's going to expect any Muslims to convert to Christianity without first feeling loved and accepted by Christians. I just can't see it happening. And so that's what I would like people to know. Maybe these people will never accept Christ. Maybe it'll be 20 years down the road. But instead of going right to them, telling them what you believe and saying accept it or not, and they don't accept it, or investing in relationships, loving them, being kind to them, giving them a whole new idea of what a Christian even is, and then letting the Holy Spirit work over time, and maybe they'll come in contact with other Christians who are also loving and start to think, wow, what is this about these Christians that enables them to love me even though I'm different from them?
Well, I mean, how else did anybody else become a Christian? It's from the love of another Christian, right?
Yes.
I mean, that's just the way it's supposed to work. Yeah, and we just have to do that. So I just love that. The reason I love your story is because you guys had a plan, you had a dream, you're going this way, and then God just is like, that's really great, so we're going to do it my way now.
Yes.
And so you have these kind of detours, and one of them being Abbey Lane that ends up being not just a really good experience, but you talk about in the book about how it specifically prepared you for going to Cambodia.
Oh, yeah.
Just briefly talk about a couple specific ways how you think that it not only was just a nice, stopover, but actually was really preparing you in the next thing that God had for you.
Yeah, one of the physical, tangible examples I give is the bedbugs that we ended up having. I started getting bites all over my body and didn't really think about bedbugs, then realized what it was. We found the bedbug and this whole big mess that you can read about because it's actually kind of funny. But the thing that happened was friends of ours did not want to come into our apartment. They didn't want the girls to come spend the night at their house. Even this adorable six-year-old little girl, Nina tried to give her a hug, and she's like, you got bed bugs. Like, so, and we were just these, I mean, it was hilarious and adorable, and I cried because I thought, oh my goodness, we are untouchable. We are outcasts.
Oh, wow.
We went from being, I wanted to say to her, hey, listen, I write books and go around and speak to people. Just because I have bed bugs doesn't mean and I thought, whoa, that's my pride. I don't want to be like this. I don't want people to think of me like this. And it just really gave us so much empathy for people who are looked down on or cast aside for reasons that may or may not be anything that they have any kind of control over, whether it's the color of their skin or what they're wearing on their head or their refugee status or because they're gay or anything that causes someone to belittle them and demean them and look down on them and not want to be around them when they couldn't help it. So that was a painful experience that I am so thankful for, because it's really the closest I've ever come to being shunned like that.
Who would have ever said thank you for bedbugs? Wow.
I don't want them ever again.
Yes. Everything can be used for good. Goodness. Well, goodness. Look at our time. We're like way past time, but well, I know that there's so much more that you share in your different ebooks about these different seasons that I hope everybody goes and picks up. Is there anything else that you, just in closing, that you'd like to communicate to people about the book or Abbey Lane or your time in Cambodia so far?
Not really. I would love for people to buy the book and read it. It's kind of my hope and dream that every American Christian will make a refugee or Muslim friend. I think it can make all the difference in the world. And so that's what I tried to do, was just share these real stories of real people. And I explained to people that if you look at my life and you're intimidated by it, where you think, oh, I could never do what she does, then that's not what I want. And if you look at it and think I'm some kind of superhero or whatever, what I want is for people to look at my life and to see Jesus and to say, I could do that too, because she's admitting it was hard for her. She was scared. She didn't do it right. She screwed up. And my screwing up, I think, gives people confidence in themselves that even if I do ask the wrong questions or say the right things or mess up, it's not the end of the world and it's going to be okay. So that's just what I've tried to make my life about, is I would rather inspire people to go live the best story that God has for them. I don't want anybody to be impressed by me or intimidated by me. And that's what my prayer is on a daily basis. God, center me and humble my heart and help me to truly want you to get glory and more people to be loved, and show me how that I can help make that happen.
Well, I will tell you from personal experience, you've always inspired me. So I think, at least in part, your prayers have been answered.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, just to get really practical, I had talked to Jill about just some real practical ways that people can get involved. What do you say to people who say, maybe I want a friend that's a refugee, but I have no idea how to do that? What are your practical recommendations for that?
Well, World Relief is a really big organization that has actually had to just close its office in Columbus because of lack of federal funding and less refugees coming in. I don't know how every state works, and I know that there are pockets of places in the states that have a lot more refugees than others. And I know for a lot of people who live maybe out in the country more, not close to a big city, they probably don't have a lot of refugees around them. But I am convinced if you want to make it happen, you can. Everybody has a big city somewhere close to them. And I think if you put enough intention into it and ask around, just ask people that you know. Do you know of any refugee families that live here or any immigrant families? And the kids' schools, a lot of schools, it's a way you could even go to the school and say, hey, are there any kids here, any families here that might need some additional support, that might need a friend? Are there any kids who are struggling? And my thing would be, if you simply cannot find a refugee family anywhere, then find another family that is American who is struggling, maybe a single mom, maybe someone who's been in jail, maybe someone who's just really, really poor. Find that kind of family and love on them, and that to me is just as good. But I think we really can, if we make an effort, find out where there are refugee families close to us.
All right. Well, I just thank you so much for taking your Saturday morning to talk to me. I hope everybody checks out your book and your blog. Real quick, what's your website? People can check that out.
It's marlataviano.com. I do not blog regularly like I used to do. I do most of my interaction on Facebook and Instagram. But there is a lot there written that people could read if they wanted to.
Yep. All right. Well, thanks for taking the time today, Marla. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much, Amy.
Oh man, guys, we could spend another hour on just takeaways from this episode. But first and foremost, what I always take away from Marla and her family is just the depth of their faith and their willingness to do and go wherever to love people like Jesus. I watched as they blogged through simplifying their lives and giving away their possessions and downsizing, and just how the material things of this world just melted away so they could serve other people. And I want us to focus on that because I don't think we do it enough in America. I know I certainly don't. What would it look like for entire families to band together for the sake of the gospel and intentionally gear their lives to loving other people? I mean, I think so much our attention is about our house and our material things and where we're going on vacation and all of these things. Does this mean that everyone should move to some foreign country? Absolutely not. We've talked about that on the podcast, that the utmost is not, moving to a foreign country. But could we learn to love, local refugees? Could we love the single moms around us? Could we love the widows that live around us? Could we foster children or adopt? Yes, we can expend ourselves as a family just to show the love of Jesus. And just as Marla says, I hope her story really inspires you to do just that. The other thing I wanted to encourage you on is to go back and listen to Jill Anderson's episode 2 episodes back. She talked about sponsoring a refugee family. And, that can be a really good option for some of you if this whole idea of getting to know a refugee or refugee family has piqued an interest for you. I hope perhaps you begin to follow Marla and their family. I'm going to have her on in a few years so she can talk more in depth about the work that they are doing in Cambodia. I think that story really is still unfolding, but God is definitely at work there. And I think we can all pray that God would sustain them and give them boldness and opportunities to share the gospel while they are there. All right, guys, that is going to be it for this week. Thanks again so much for listening, and we will see you next week on Feathers.